There are three voices inside your head right now. One of them is lying to you. One is protecting an illusion, and one is telling you the truth you've been avoiding for years. The problem is, most people can't tell which is which, and that confusion costs them everything. My name is Father Simon. For over 2 decades, I've sat across from people in their darkest hours, listening to confessions, doubts, and the silent battles they fight with themselves. I've heard thousands of stories, and beneath all the different details, I've noticed something consistent. We all have an internal dialogue that shapes our reality, but most of us never learn to distinguish between the voices speaking inside us, and that ignorance keeps us trapped. Let me tell you about a man I met years ago. He came to me exhausted, burned out, unable to sleep. He said he felt like he was constantly at war with himself. Every decision became a battlefield. Should he stay in his marriage or leave? Should he quit his job or push through? Should he forgive his father or cut ties completely? He described it as 3 different people arguing inside him, each one completely convinced they were right. I asked him a simple question. When you're about to make a choice, which voice speaks first? He paused. Then he said, the loudest one, and that's the problem. The loudest voice is rarely the truest one. Let me break this down for you, because understanding this will change how you make every decision from this day forward. The first voice is the voice of fear. It speaks immediately, instinctively, often before you've even finished processing what's happening. It's the voice that says, don't do it, you'll fail. Don't trust them. They'll hurt you. Don't try, you're not ready. This voice believes its job is to keep you safe. And in some situations, it does. It stops you from walking into traffic or trusting the wrong person. But here's what most people don't realize. This voice doesn't know the difference between real danger and imagined danger. It treats a difficult conversation the same way it treats a physical threat. It sounds urgent, convincing, protective, but very often it's lying. Not because it wants to harm you, but because it's operating on old information, old wounds, old fears that no longer apply to your life. The second voice is the voice of ego. It speaks a little slower, a little smoother. It's the voice that says, you deserve better than this. You're right, and they're wrong. You don't need to apologize. You don't need to change. This voice isn't trying to protect you from danger. It's trying to protect your image, your pride, your sense of being in control. It makes you feel strong, justified, even righteous. But here's the trap. This voice keeps you isolated. It keeps you from growing. It tells you that admitting fault is weakness, that asking for help is humiliation, that vulnerability is defeat. It wraps your pain in armor and calls it strength. And over time, that armor becomes a prison. The third voice is the quietest. It's the voice of truth. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply observes and offers clarity. It says things like, you already know what you need to do. This isn't serving you anymore. You've been here before. This is the voice that cuts through the noise and speaks to the deepest part of who you are. The part that knows what aligns with your values and what doesn't. But because it's quiet, because it doesn't create drama or urgency, most people never hear it. Or worse, they hear it and ignore it, because what it's saying requires courage. If this is resonating with you, do me a favor. Support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. I promise you, we're going deeper. Now let's get back to the question. How do you know which voice is speaking? Here's where it gets tricky. Each voice can disguise itself as the others. Fear can sound like wisdom. Ego can sound like self-respect. And sometimes, truth sounds so uncomfortable that we convince ourselves it must be fear trying to hold us back. So let me give you a framework, something practical you can use starting today. When you're facing a decision, a conflict, or a moment of doubt, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself these 3 questions. First, is this voice trying to keep me small or help me grow? Fear will always choose smallness. It prefers the known, even if the known is painful. Truth will nudge you toward growth, even when it's terrifying. Second, is this voice focused on protecting my image or my integrity? Ego cares about how you look to others, how you compare, whether you win or lose. Truth cares about whether you're living in alignment with who you actually want to be. Third, does this voice create peace or chaos inside me? Fear creates urgency and panic. Ego creates defensiveness and aggression. Truth creates clarity, even when the path ahead is hard. Let me tell you what happened with that man I mentioned earlier. We spent weeks just listening to his internal dialogue together. I'd ask him to repeat out loud what the voices were saying, and then we'd examine them. Slowly, he started to notice patterns. The voice that told him to leave his marriage always spoke late at night when he was exhausted. That was fear, amplified by fatigue. The voice that told him he didn't need to change anything, that everyone else was the problem, that was ego, protecting him from vulnerability. And the quiet voice that said, "You're not happy because you're not being honest, not with her, not with yourself." That was truth. And he'd been ignoring it for years. You might think that once you identify the voices, the battle is over. But that's not true. Knowing which voice is which doesn't make the others disappear. What it does is give you a choice, and that choice, repeated over days, months, years, that is what builds a life of integrity instead of a life of reaction. You've probably experienced this before without realizing it. Think back to a moment when you said something in anger, something you immediately regretted. That was ego or fear speaking, and you gave it the microphone. Or remember a time when you had a gut feeling about someone or something, ignored it, and later thought, "I knew it. I felt it." That was the voice of truth, and you overruled it with logic or fear or the need to please someone else. Here's what most people don't understand. The voice you listen to most becomes the loudest over time. If you constantly give fear the floor, it will dominate every decision. If you constantly feed ego, it will drown out everything else. But if you practice listening to truth, if you honor that quiet, steady voice even when it's uncomfortable, it gets stronger. It becomes easier to hear. And eventually, it becomes your default. But here's the part that people find hardest to accept. You can't silence the other voices. You can't kill fear. You can't eliminate ego. They're part of being human. The goal isn't to destroy them. The goal is to recognize them, thank them for trying to help, and then choose truth anyway. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're in a relationship, and your partner does something that hurts you. Fear immediately says, "See, I told you they'd hurt you. Don't trust them. Protect yourself. Build walls." Ego says, "You don't deserve to be treated like this. Make them pay. Make them see how wrong they were." But truth says, "This hurt." And you need to tell them, not to punish them, but because honesty is the only way forward. All 3 voices have something to offer. Fear is reminding you that you've been hurt before and your feelings matter. Ego is reminding you of your worth. But only truth is offering you a path that leads to connection and resolution instead of isolation and resentment. Most people never get to this level of self-awareness. They spend their entire lives being tossed around by whichever voice happens to be loudest in the moment. They make fear-based decisions and wonder why they feel stuck. They make ego-based decisions and wonder why they feel alone. They hear the voice of truth and dismiss it as naive or weak or impractical. And here's the thing. The world we live in amplifies the wrong voices. Social media feeds your ego. The news feeds your fear. Entertainment distracts you from truth. You're surrounded by systems designed to keep you reactive, defensive, and disconnected from your deepest self. You might be wondering right now, how do I start practicing this? What does it actually look like day to day? Here's a simple protocol. Every evening before you sleep, take 5 minutes and replay one decision you made that day. It doesn't have to be big. Maybe it was how you responded to a text. Maybe it was what you ate. Maybe it was whether you spoke up in a meeting or stayed silent. Replay it. And ask yourself, which voice was I listening to? Don't judge yourself. Just notice. Over time, you'll start to see patterns. You'll notice that certain situations trigger certain voices. You'll notice that certain people bring out fear or ego. And you'll start to recognize the quiet presence of truth, even in moments of chaos. If you can identify with any of this, drop a comment below. Even just one sentence, I hear all three. Sometimes naming it out loud is the first step toward clarity. Now let's go deeper, because there's a fourth layer most people never consider. Sometimes the voice you think is truth is actually fear pretending to be wise. And sometimes the voice you think is ego is actually truth reminding you of your boundaries. This is where discernment becomes an art, not a formula. And it's why you can't rely on a single moment of clarity. You need consistency. You need to keep checking in. Keep asking the questions. Keep listening. I once spoke with a woman who was convinced that leaving her job was the right move. She said the voice of truth was telling her to quit, to pursue her passion, to stop wasting her life. But when we dug deeper, I asked her, what does that voice sound like? What does it feel like in your body when it speaks? She said it felt like urgency, like panic, like if she didn't act now, she'd regret it forever. That's not truth, that's fear. Truth doesn't panic, truth is patient. It doesn't create urgency, it creates knowing. She stayed, not because I told her to, but because she learned to distinguish between the pressure of fear and the clarity of truth. And 6 months later, she found a better opportunity, one that aligned with her values, not just her desperation. This is the work. It's not glamorous, it's not fast, but it's the difference between living your life and being lived by your unexamined thoughts. Here's what I want you to take with you today. You are not your thoughts. You are not the A life based on truth, integrity, and alignment. So here's your daily practice. Morning. Before you start your day, take 3 deep breaths and ask yourself, which voice do I want to guide me today? Evening. Reflect on one moment where you listened to the wrong voice. What would truth have said instead? Weekly. Find one decision you've been avoiding and write down what each voice says about it. Then choose consciously. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be aware. And awareness, practiced consistently, becomes transformation. This is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you've always been, beneath the noise. And that person, that true self, has been waiting for you to listen.